Bounty hunter, the most thankless job in Warhammer 40K. By the time the little box began to pulse under my palm, 2 brothers were dead, a surgeon was praying to keep breathing, and I had enough blood on my coat to buy silence in any bar in the lower docks. The worst part was not that I had killed for money. The worst part was that, when the moment came, I knew exactly which mercy would save thousands, and exactly which 2 lives I would have to spend to pay for it. The water was rusty as usual, nothing new there. On this edge of the dock, the pipes had not been changed since my father was younger than I am now. I watch it twist into a little funnel around my fingers. Today, though, the water has finally taken on another shade red. My knuckles are split open because I braced my hand against the concrete wall of the pump station more than once while I was shooting. I tore the skin on the rebar. I do not feel the pain yet. The pain will come in an hour, maybe an hour and a half. Sharp, sudden, out of nowhere when the adrenaline stops feeding me. Then all the tiredness will drain down into my legs, into my knees. It will settle there, and I will come back to myself, and I will calm down. The mirror above me was cracked before I came in. Someone smashed a bottle against it a long time ago, judging by the rust around the shards. I see my face in 4 broken pieces, gray eyes, 3 days of stubble, maybe 4, I do not count anymore, a scar across the cheek. The one I got back in the service, the one that now looks as if it has always belonged there. The bags under my eyes are thick as the lining of a uniform jacket. I take out a low stick and hold it between my teeth. The lighter clicks empty 3 times. The last promethium at the bottom catches on the 4th try. I drag so hard that heat blooms in my lungs. On the sink beside me stands the box. It is about 30 centimeters along the long side, smooth. Its color is not one the Imperium makes. There are no imperial stamps on it, no double-headed eagle, no mark of the Mechanicus, no seal on the lock. Only along the seam of the lid, if you look from the right angle, runs a thin, almost invisible sigil, a tamper seal. Those are placed by people who do not need every random loader to see their mark. Those are the things they check when the box comes back to them. No dirt on it. Dust slides off as if it is afraid to cling. I lay my palm on top, not out of fear, just to check something. Under my hand something pulses, soft as a sleeping vein. It is not my box, but it will stay with me for another 40 minutes. After that, I will hand it to a man whose hands are far too clean to dirty them in this district, and I will get enough credits to move out at last. 6 shifts ago, I sat in the same bar and cleaned my revolver. 6 days by the local count. In the lower dock, time is measured no other way. Back then, I did not yet know that along with that damned contract, I would buy myself another dream, one that would come back again and again. The broken shard of mirror looks at me and asks whether it was worth it. I breathe smoke onto the glass and wait for it to settle. The pulsing under my palm does not stop. Somewhere outside in the barroom, a chair scrapes. An old recording of the Imperial string hymn is playing. Someone has put coins into the wrong machine again. Under the floor, the lift hums. The huge damned thing hums so low that old fillings start ringing in your teeth. I know that hum. It is not going anywhere, not now, not tomorrow. Sometimes I think it is already inside me. In a hive, it is impossible to remember silence. You are born under that hum, go to your shift under that hum, get married under that hum if the curse takes you, and die under it too, I suspect. The lift breathes louder than your own lungs, and by the age of 10 you stop noticing. Today I hear it again, not with my ears, somewhere deeper, in the place where I usually keep the answer to why I took that job 16 years ago and why I left it 12 years ago. If I press myself hard enough, the answer is always the same, because outside the hive, I never learned how to exist. The hum of the lift is, in truth, the heartbeat of this hive. It cannot be switched off, cannot be drowned out, cannot be turned away from. It simply is. Everything is over. Everything begins again. All right, I tell my reflection in 4 pieces. Speak, in order from the start. This should be interesting. The eating hole is called Mabel's. No Mabel ever worked there. That was the name of the steam reactor on one of the first shuttles that landed in this dock centuries ago. The reactor was stripped for parts long ago. Only the sign remained. Everything in the Imperium is like that. The sign outlives whatever stood beneath it. I was sitting in the corner at a table that had soaked up beer spills and someone's blood from a fight so old no one remembered it. In front of me was a bowl of what the menu called Grok's meat stew. In truth, it was probably lower-level rat, boiled in a sauce the color of oxidized iron. I did not even try the filth. I was waiting. He came in without a sound. It is impossible to enter that place without a sound. The door squeals, the floor squeals, the eyes of every regular run sideways, marking every new face. But somehow he managed it. I simply lifted my eyes and saw that he was already sitting across from me. His skin was the kind you do not see in the hive on anyone below the spire. Do not misunderstand me. It was not white or clean. It was even, not a single scar, not one stain left by thousands of hours under bad light and cheap food. He looked as if he had stepped out of a sterile chamber an hour ago, stood still, chosen a coat cut to his shape, and gone looking for me in the one part of the spaceport where no decent person would see him in the flesh. "You are Maddox Cade," he said. Not a question, I said. I chewed the stick at the corner of my mouth. "I was told I would recognize you," he continued, "but you did not need describing. Too much honor, get to the point." From under his coat he took a small flat cylinder, a little thicker than a finger, and placed it on the table between us. I did not touch it. In this city, every second flat cylinder is either an advance or a surprise that burns your arm to the elbow. Better to listen first and make sure. "My name is Lucian Grieve," he said, "factor of a trade syndicate." I almost choked on smoke. A factor of a trade syndicate. Here, on the 3rd level of the lower dock, in a coat under which there was something too angular to be a simple ledger. I did not even laugh. He was not saying it to make me laugh. He was saying it to put the correct thought into my head. Do not press, do not ask, do not answer what has not been asked. I know people like that. I met them when I still served in the magistratum before they threw me out. They always have the same way of moving. They do not come to solve a problem. They come to point at where the problem is. They are a long, dry, nimble hand reaching all the way to the spire, and if needed, beyond the clouds. If such a man gives you his name, he simply wants you to know whose name to use later when they come for you. The magistratum had its own classification for visitors like that. More than once, while I still wore the uniform, we received notices. Such and such a man, clean-looking, calls himself a merchant, does not behave like a merchant. Do not touch. Do not inspect. If he is going somewhere, let him pass. If he wants to take one of yours, do not resist. Back then, I did not always know who they worked for. Sitting across from Lucian Grieve, I knew. He was the kind of man who carried not only a weapon under his coat, but also a small rosette. A little 8-pointed mark with an eye at its center, the kind no one shows unless they are about to put out the lights. "Yesterday, a cargo module came down in Hangar 84, Lucian said, for dead. The shuttle was flying under the official manifest of the Haulers Cooperative, but it was carrying our cargo under another code. Before the port authorities arrived, someone took one small box. It must be returned. The contents are not your concern. Understood, do not open it." He looked at me the way an old teacher looks at a pupil who has finally managed to add 2 and 2, approvingly, a little tired. There is a control sigil along the seam of the lid. If the sigil is broken, your participation in this matter will end together with your participation in all other matters. I nodded slowly. This was not bargaining. These were the rules of a game into which I had already been written. 1 week, perhaps less. Sooner would be preferable. "So hurry." He placed a finger on the edge of the cylinder. The cylinder clicked. Some kind of reader was built into it, and it threw a projection of a figure onto the table. I looked at it. Then I looked up at Lucien. Then I looked at the figure again, because the first time, honestly, I thought there was a stain in my eye. People do not pay that kind of money for a small box. With that kind of money, a man can buy a new face, a new name, a new life on another planet, or they can buy what he will do afterward. Many times, without reports. Half now, he said, the other half on delivery. I did not touch the cylinder. Why me? I asked. His pupils narrowed slightly. It was the only movement on that smooth face. Because you know what the credentials of my superiors look like, he said softly, and because you know what will happen if you refuse me. That was the whole conversation. I took the cylinder. When he left, I sat for a long time and smoked, watching the fat in the bowl of stew curdle into silver islands. I thought about trust on the edge of the Imperium. Trust here is like cheap lighter promethium. It burns dirty, it stinks, and most of the time it simply explodes in your hand and takes the fingers with it. I had just stuck my fingers into that flame, and I could already hear the fuse hissing. For that kind of money, I thought, I will have to kill a lot of people. I truly did not know then that at the end of that fuse there would be no explosion. There would be something worse. Hangar 84 belongs to the Cargo Pilots Cooperative. In practice, that means no one. Cooperatives in this part of the hive have a charter, a chairman, a hidden cash box, and not one living representative you can approach with a complaint. Everything is settled by those who are younger, angrier, and holding shotguns at the ready. I went to the hangar on foot. I passed through the conveyor neck, through the half-abandoned seam between sectors, past the former Ministorum Chapel where, back in my time, an old confessor served under the nickname Father Overtime. They called him that because he took dockworkers' confessions while holding their shift cards in his hand, and granted absolution at gate speed. The chapel now stood boarded up. The imperial double-headed eagle over the entrance was partly broken off. One head hung by a single rivet. Every time I pass it, something deep inside me twitches in the place where I once had a conscience. Then it stops. I reached the crash site by the middle of second shift. The outer cordon was held by the Port Force Corps. 5 men in gray carapace, all with short shotguns. These locals live here, rotate for rations, and had been tired half a shift already. I did not give them a paper. I gave them a tobacco pack with credits tucked inside. The senior one let me through without a word. At the base of the shuttle stood 2 others. Black carapace under dust, visored helmets, shock mauls, and combat shotguns in their hands. Adeptus Arbites. 2 of them was too few for an ordinary crash. The simple fact that they had come to a routine hauler's cooperative accident told me more than 10 manifests. They had not come to process the wreck. They had come to see what exactly had been stolen. That meant the cargo was the kind the prefecture hears about before the duty clerk is informed. I did not go near the Arbites. I moved along the wall around the side where no one had yet trampled. One of them glanced at me, judged the coat, the stubber in the open holster, the breath of smoke, and looked away. A bounty hunter with dirty papers did not interest him, so long as the bounty hunter did not crawl into his business. The shuttle skeleton was still smoking. The nose had been crushed as if struck by a giant hammer. One wing was torn away, the tail scattered across 3 sections of the hangar. It smelled of burned promethium, burned ferroglass, and that special odor you never mistake for anything else. Human tissue charred on hot metal. I knew that smell from service. Since then, I had developed something like professional indifference to it. This too was work, only today it belonged to someone else. The bodies had already been carried off. Only the paint remained. Dark stains on ferrocrete. Several handprints around a torn section of the pilot's seat. Someone had crawled from here to there, crawled a long time, then ran out of strength. I followed the line, crouched, studied the second stain. It was not like the others. Not impact spray, not the drag mark of a wounded person, but a small dense mark, almost round. Blood, but not the blood that had run out of the people who burned in the shuttle. This blood was fresher, about half a day old. Someone had come while everything was still burning. Came close, maybe cut himself on something, maybe simply sliced a hand while forcing the cargo hatch. I moved on to where the traces in the dust spoke more clearly. A wide strip. Something heavy had been dragged. Not a body, an object. The edge of that strip ended by the doors leading to the outer conveyor. There was blood there too, just a little, barely visible, as if someone had leaned a hand against the frame at the last moment. "Hey!" I lifted my head. The loading foreman stood 10 meters away. A large type with half a face that had been born his and half a face that was augmetic, cheap and rusty, the kind built from scrap in the lower hive. A brace stuck out above his right eye. A vox bead was wired into his temple. Around him stood 3 of his people. In this part of the dock, none of them would ever be allowed upward. One was a twist with an extra wrist joint and broken pigmentation. The second had been chemically ruined by working in hold fumes. The third was a sanctioned abhuman of a short branch, with a permit plate on his chest issued by the Mechanicus in the previous generation. They were not the same thing, no matter how you looked. But upstairs, the Imperium had no need for faces like theirs. "What are you sniffing around for?" "Working," I said, "by right." "What right?" I showed him my magistratum badge. I had owned it for years, and it had long been struck from the rolls, but the foreman did not know that. And even if he understood, he needed an excuse not to clash with me in front of his people. I gave him that excuse. "Saw nothing," he said. "No, nothing, none of my affair." I came on shift, and it was already smoking. "I need names." "What names?" "Names of those who were hanging around that shuttle in the night." "I told you." I took his living hand, drew it out by the index finger, and laid it on the edge of a twisted metal casing. With my other hand, I took out my lighter. The foreman blinked once and started talking. That is what I like about foremen. It never gets to the second step with them. "Owen," he spat. "Owen Slate, Docker Tech, 3rd Sector. He was hanging about all that shift and again after the crash." "Him and his what?" "I do not know. He came alone, but he was twitchy like he was on stim. Only he did not smell like stim." "What did he smell like?" The foreman licked his lip. He thought. For him, that was not easy. "Like rotten guts," he said. Like something inside him was already rotting. And fear. I cannot explain it better. Sniff for yourself if you care. I let go of his finger. He shook his hand by instinct, though I had not even managed to hurt him. "Owen Slate, ordinary Docker Tech, not a professional. Professionals do not leave traces like that. Not their own blood, not drag marks, not witnesses, not the little tube of salve he had dropped beside the hatch. I picked it up a little later. Standard Imperial Guard field salve. Nothing special, but dockworkers do not have it. They steal it from medici orderlies." Owen had been frightened, and Owen was carrying something many people now wanted to find. And I guessed he had no plan, no men, and no money. I went over to what remained of the cockpit and crouched beside the open manifest. One of the Arbites had probably torn it out and thrown it onto a broken piece of the instrument panel. Top line, sender, haulers cooperative, standard in system flight, route to the orbital dock. Main cargo, engineering tools in quantity, spare ventilation filters, sealed him reliquary. All domestic, all verifiable, all boring. Between the lines, in the 3rd column, in a code with 3 letters and a dot, was an added note pressed with a neat template that did not look cooperative issue. I had seen that code once. That is how unofficial inserts are marked inside an official manifest. Cargo under outer cover. The real owner does not appear in the documents. In other words, the shuttle was carrying someone else's box under the guise of spare filters and a sealed him reliquary. And whoever truly owned that box had now sent Lucien Grieve. A frightened man with valuable cargo is a signal flare by nature. Bigger predators would see him before I did. I left the hangar lighting up as I walked. Behind me were cordons and silence. Ahead lay a long chain of questions, each worse than the last. I did not yet know the final question, but I was already walking toward it. Already walking. I knew the fence nicknamed Rusty Tooth from the days when I wore the uniform. Back then, he kept 3 knives in his belt and a short auto pistol for bad visitors, and around his neck hung an amulet made from the burned tooth of his twin brother, which was where the nickname came from. He was small, sly, and bought everything that did not carry imperial marks, and sometimes what did carry them too, if the price allowed. In recent years he had settled in the cargo mazes by the 6th pier. Huge freight containers stand around the unloading zone there, each as tall as a house, stacked in piles that make whole districts between them, streets, alleys, an entire city of rusted metal. Today you know the way to Rusty Tooth. Tomorrow, 10 containers have been shifted by crane, and you search for him again. I entered that maze at sundown. I should say at once that sundown in the lower hive is when the lights on the ceiling change from blue to red, nothing more. It was raining, not real rain but condensate from the upper floors, poisonous with machine oil. It struck the collar of my coat like hot spit. I heard the sound before I could make anything out. A dull short thud, bullets, then louder, a burst. Then the crack of a plywood shield splintering apart and a man's cry that cut off sharply. I pressed myself to a container. I had drawn the Tiber stub revolver before I had time to think about drawing it. That is reflex. You cannot drink it away in a few years. The container in front of Rusty Tooth's shop had been blown outward from inside. The door was torn off, the lid underfoot, a dim red lamp blinking in the opening. 2 men rolled out from within. Low-grade gang trash. I knew their faces. The Grinder Gang. They held the district between the 8th and 11th piers. One was dragging the other by the shoulder. The wounded one had smoke rising from his lower belly. A belly smokes like that when plasma burns through it. So someone inside had a plasma piece, and that meant there was something valuable in the shop. Perhaps a precious relic. In any case, all this noise had not begun over a simple trinket. They did not expect to see anyone outside. "Hey!" shouted the one dragging his friend. He saw me. He did not recognize me. He saw only a coat and a revolver. In the lower hive, that is enough. His autogun was already rising toward my chest when I fired. A stub revolver of that caliber is hard to call a weapon in the ordinary sense. What you hold is more like a sentence. It does not shoot. It condemns you on the spot. Execution and funeral. The first bullet entered just below his collarbone, passed through his chest, and came out by the shoulder blade. The wounded man he was dragging slipped from his hands. He himself stood for one more second, staring down in surprise at his own breastbone, where there was now a hole the size of a fist. Then his knees folded, he sat, and then he lay down. The wounded one lifted his head. He could no longer do anything. I came no closer than I had to and shot him once more. From inside the container, someone answered with fire. A blast of shot from a sawed-off gun lashed out of the dark. It shredded a control panel behind me and scattered sparks. I dropped to one knee, leaned out, and saw 3 men. One stood by the cash terminal, young, with a cloth tied over one eye. In his hand was a short, clearly homemade chopped-down plasma pistol. He probably wore that plasma piece like a family relic. Ordinary low-grade gang trash never carries such things. They are stolen from the guard, or passed from father to son, or won at cards from some desperate poor fool. The second was crouched beside the owner of the shop. Rusty Tooth lay on the floor. Something was spreading across his stomach. Later I would understand what. The second man had a sawed-off shotgun. The third stood farther away, in the shadow of a shelf of junk. In his hands was a real Las carbine, battered but working. I shot the first one in the shoulder. He cried out and toppled sideways. The plasma pistol flew from his hand and vanished behind a shelf. I rolled behind a metal pallet of spare parts. Las discharges scraped sparks from the wall above my head. It smelled of burned paint and burned meat. Alive, I barked without raising my head. Something wheezed in answer, not yes but not no. I counted the discharges. 15 gone. I heard the clicks. 16, 17. On the 18th, I lifted the barrel over the pallet and fired at the sound. The stub round punched through the sheet metal of the shelf and the man behind it in one motion. He fell, and from the way he fell I knew he would not get up. The third, the one crouching, tried to run. I did not let him. The bullet entered his lower back. He screamed for about 3 seconds, then fell silent. The quiet after a fight in a closed space is its own beast. It tastes of metal and powder. It rings in your ears like a mosquito. I stood, shook out my coat, and reloaded the cylinder slowly, as proper. Empty casings rang at my feet. Rusty Tooth was still breathing. His long belly had been opened, cold steel, that kind. He was staring at the ceiling with one eye. The second was gone. They had tortured him, questioned him. "Maddox," he rasped when he recognized me. "Hello, old man." "They came for the box," he said. "Owen did not bring the box." "Owen." He coughed. Pink bubbles swelled on his lips. Owen came, and Rusty Tooth coughed into laughter, then back into coughing. But he was not selling. He was looking for a healer. "What healer?" "The underground one in the roots. I sent him to Merrick Cole. Told him for 500 Merrick will stitch up any heresy." He went still. The bubbles stopped swelling. I came out of the container onto the metal walkway. Condensate rain was still spitting on my coat. Far away, 2 alleys down between the stacks, I saw a shadow flicker. Someone had been watching, listening, and was now leaving. I marked the angle and the direction. I lit a smoke. My fingers trembled a little. You never get used to that, never truly. Why would a thief need a healer, I thought. A thief does not carry cargo worth a housing block into a place where any gang thug can find him. A thief does not bring valuable cargo to an underground clinic. Owen was not a thief. He was trying something. He did not need a buyer. He needed someone willing to risk. The address Rusty Tooth managed to whisper led me to a night house called the Quiet Anchor. The only quiet things there were the dead, and the anchor was the only object in that part of the hive with any nautical meaning, enough to justify the romantic name. I rented a room. I passed the money through the grate. They gave me no key. In places like that, doors open to a finger pressed against the sensor. I went down the corridor and counted doors. His room still smelled of panic. I pried the lock with a knife. Once inside, the first thing I did was cover the advertising sign outside the window. It blinked through the thin curtains, and under that light it was impossible to see the floor. When the red glare was gone, I finally saw his trace. Owen was already gone, but he had been there recently, perhaps half an hour before. His bed was not even pressed down. He had not slept. I knew that from the leftovers, from the empty wrapping of a hemostatic bandage, from a piece of shirt torn along the seam and thrown by the wall. Too good a shirt for a docker. Smooth cloth with braid. You do not take such a thing off yourself. You take it off a patient to replace it with clean cloth. From the dried stains on the floor. Blood had patterned it from the window to the mattress, as if someone had been dragged here onto the mattress, not away from it. There was also the smell of pus, and something else that tightened something inside me. A long-forgotten mix of sweet inward rot and medical antiseptic. The smell of a genetic sickness in its late stage, the kind for which Imperial medics write denied and strike the patient from the lists. On the table near the windowsill lay a crumpled sheet, really just paper trash, a piece of packaging used as a rough note. Owen had drawn on it with something that smudged, maybe a charcoal pencil. A diagram. I recognized it quickly. A cross-section of the lower levels of the orbital tether, the place we call the roots. I stood over that diagram for a while, smoking, and something happened that does not happen to me often. I remembered. They did not throw me out of the magistratum for drinking and not for corruption. With me it was simpler, and for the disciplinary board worse. I beat a man to death in a cell. Not because he was guilty, though he probably was. Not because I was a sadist. I have never considered myself one. Because I was tired and he was shouting and I wanted him, thrown damn him, to shut up. That was all. The exact same spiral. Exhaustion, despair, the inability to stop in time. Later I saw his corpse on the gurney, saw my own hands, and smelled exactly the same thing that now stank in this room. Back then my partner Colin Ward came to me in the corridor and said, "Maddox, that was not you. That was not like you at all." I remembered that sentence for the rest of my life, precisely because he was lying very clearly and he knew he was lying, and I knew that he knew. Colin was a decent man. The magistratum ground people like that up first. Later they transferred him to an oversight commission, and half a year after that they wrote him off for wounds. In the same month when, according to rumor, he tried to file a report about internal affairs. I heard nothing more about him. Perhaps he is alive. Perhaps he keeps a farm somewhere on the agricultural rim of the sector. Such an ending was beyond my purse. I would have had to work more than I have worked in my entire life to afford it. Owen, whoever he was walking down the same spiral. The difference was that mine tightened in a cell around one corpse, and his tightened somewhere ahead around something still unclear. In the next room someone dropped a bottle. I did not flinch. I went to the corner where something bright stuck out from under the mattress. A kitchen knife, hand sharpened, fresh blood on the blade. I went back into the corridor, through the door from which Owen had apparently dragged that shirt. That room's door stood ajar. Inside, a middle-aged man lay face up. In one hand a needle, in the other a credit chip. The chip had fallen from his fingers. The needle had not reached the vein. His throat had been opened not with one cut but many. Unevenly, terribly. As if the person doing it had done it for the first time in his life and kept thinking he had not finished what he had started. On the table beside the drug cellar lay small doses of dust and several packets of what the hive calls cherry smoke. Cheap stimulation for night workers. Nothing Xenos, nothing unusual. An ordinary dealer, and Owen had come to him with nothing. Owen had come for medical supplies the dealer could get under the counter. The dealer, it seemed, had asked too much or refused to deal with someone trembling in little shivers and unable to explain exactly who needed the medicine. They argued. Owen pulled the knife. I looked again at the cut throat, at 8 uneven entries of the blade. "All right, boy," I said to the empty room. "So you have killed already. So you already know there is no way back." That understanding does two things to a man. Either he breaks and gives up, or he goes to the end because the road back no longer exists. Owen went to the end. I knew that from the diagram of the roots on the table by the window. He was going down to the base of the lift to where Merrick Cole had his underground clinic, where there were no Imperial medics, no reporting, and no conscience. For a large enough sum, they will inject anything into you there, and ask only what color the credit is. I put out the second low stick on the edge of the table and went out to the stairs. Under my feet, the floor was humming. The hum came from below, from the roots where I now had to descend. It was the lift, the old iron bone that runs through our whole hive. To reach the foundation of the orbital lift from the hive, you have to descend a very long way. The hive hangs above the planet's rotten surface on a web of ferrocrete supports, and in the middle of it, piercing it from spire to earth and farther into the endless depth, stands the tether, the orbital lift, a huge rusted spear someone drove into the rotting chest of the planet so it would not twitch while they pumped out its last juices. That is how I always thought of it, before this contract and during it. Everything under its shadow is always dead to some degree. The freight descent platform at the 16th pier is a metal circle 20 meters across, with a grate in the middle wrapped in chains as thick as an arm. You stand in the center, press an ancient cast button with the worn mark of the Mechanicus. The floor trembles, a brace descends from above, and you begin a smooth, unhurried movement downward. 50 levels. First slowly, then a little faster. Then you see nothing but support beams rushing past with lamps, riveted red danger plates, and dark hollows where air ducts vanish. I stood on that grate alone. The coat hung from my shoulders like a wet rag. The revolver was in my hand, because on descents like that you never know what is waiting at the next instant. I already knew that behind me, one level above, someone had entered another cage and was riding after me. I felt it in my skin. When someone is following you, the same place at the base of my skull always itches. The noise changed as I descended. Above, the hive hum, fused from 1,000 shafts. Closer to the middle, a knocking. The measured, rhythmic knock of cargo capsules going up and down through neighboring lift shafts. Lower still, it was no longer a knock, but a slow, low sound like the breathing of an enormous beast that sleeps and will never wake. That was the tether itself breathing. Wind raised by the pressure difference across kilometers of height hummed in its entrails. The tether was impossibly thick. It was reinforced with layers of adamantine braid, and with every atmospheric blow in the upper layers, it answered with that low sound, the kind you feel through all your organs. At the 51st level, the descent stopped. The brace released. I stepped onto concrete black with soot. Above me, somewhere far up, the end of the tether was lost. Above me, a little closer, my hive disappeared from sight. I stood in its very foundation, where the legs of history press into the earth. At the base of the tether, a repair cohort of the Adeptus Mechanicus passes every shift. I saw them a couple of times back in service. They wear red robes, half-human with implanted manipulators instead of both arms, faces sewn behind copper masks along the line of the mouth. They are led by one full engine seer, and he reads a prayer in binaric every 15 minutes. When they pass, you feel something answer inside your own skull. Not words, rhythm. They say that if you approach them with a question then, the tech priest may not hear you, and the servitors will decide for him. I did not test it, of course. I learned to keep away from them. The air here smelled different. Machine oil, heated ferrocrete, and the smell of stagnant water. Somewhere at the base of the tether are pump stations that drive coolant hundreds of kilometers upward. Sometimes dampness breaks through from them. That was the dampness I smelled now, especially clear. Merrick Cole had his reception room in a former shift control chamber. A two-room box of sheet metal between two giant flywheels that once provided reserve rotation for some section of the tether. Now the flywheels stood still. The dust on them was as gray as the silver at my temples. I went in without knocking. His door was locked with a pin. For me, that was not a problem. Merrick was sitting in an operating chair, his own chair, tied to it with his own straps. Beaten. Nose broken, lip split, one eye swollen fully shut. The augmetic of his left forearm was a cheap manipulator with 6 segments, the kind technicians use to patch ventilation shafts. Its casing had been opened and it hung on wires. Over all of it lay the smell of someone else's blood and someone else's fear. He saw me and tried to jerk. He could not. "I am not one of them," I said, tiredly undoing the first strap. "I am here about something else." "Where did he go?" "Who?" Merrick rasped. He had not had time to prepare the lie. The last hours had gone into staying conscious. "Owen Slate, the tech, the one you refused this morning." Merrick closed his good eye, then opened it and still decided. "He brought Xenos tech," he said. "A box, ampules inside. I had never seen the like." He said Eldari. I do not know if it was truly Eldari, but they what? Merrick licked cracked lips. They did not smell like ours, not like the Mechanicus makes, not metal. They smelled entirely different, strange. I have never met that smell before. I knew that smell. I had seen Xenos tech once in my life at the end of my service when we raided a warehouse belonging to a petty smuggler. All their things smell like that. Those Eldari trinkets. They do not have metal in our ordinary sense. They have blood in the metal. What did he ask? To inject his brother. He said the medics had written his brother off. Hereditary taint in the last stage, genetic rot as they also call it. He said he heard on the black market that Eldari bioalchemy can sometimes reverse tissue decay or drive a person mad even faster depending on the person. But Owen spoke like people speak when they have no choice left. He did not believe for certain. He simply could not try. And I refused, Merrick said, and wheezed as if crying without tears. I refused. I had heard the same rumors he had. I do not know if any of it is true. I have seen inquisitorial people burn out quarters when they decided Xeno's heresy had gone hand to hand. I wanted to live, do you understand? And he said fine, and left. Then these others came and began asking where he had gone. The ones who beat you. Merrick nodded. I told them everything. Where? Technical tunnel of the 6th sector of the tether. There is an old pump station there. They have not used it in a long time. It was sealed, but you can get in from below. They went there, and I told them he was probably going there too. He had asked me about it yesterday. I said nothing. Through the little window came the breathing of machinery. Low, endless. How many? 6, maybe 7. One had a fake Arbeits helmet, clearly stripped from a corpse, no authority, just worn against bullets. The rest had Las carbines, sawed-off guns, and one heavy piece. How long ago did they leave? 20 minutes, 25. I cut the remaining straps, folded his manipulator as best I could, and fixed it to his chest with wire. Will they come back? Merrick asked at my back. They will come back, I said, at least not in the shape they came this time. I stepped into the shadow between the flight wheels. Behind me, on the next level, the one following me was already on my trail. I heard the faint ring of his heels. And I went down, into the 6th technical sector of the tether, to the place where all of it had to end. Technical tunnels do not like people. They are not meant for ordinary ones. They were made for servitors and for the wretches who carry the rank of junior tech adept. Little Mechanicus initiates sent down here from time to time to renew oil in the bearings. Ordinary people are not supposed to be in these tunnels. The passage was narrow, exactly the width of my shoulders. On both sides, a fine vibrating mesh. Beneath the mesh, nothing, literally nothing. A black abyss where here and there tiny red lights burned on support bearings. If you fall there, I guarantee no one gathers you whole. I walked and listened. In places like that, hearing matters more than sight. They heard me before I heard them. That was my mistake. The first thing that happened was the whine of a bullet over my head. A Las discharge does not whine, it hisses. So they had more than Las carbines. I dropped belly first onto the mesh, cold and depth below me. I pressed myself into it as if it could hide me. He went past us, a voice sounded ahead. He is already in the sector. Faster, answered a second. So they had not seen me yet, only heard me. I slowly crawled 6 meters back along the mesh to where the bridge turned around a huge protrusion, the turning mechanism of some ancient lift. There was room to crouch behind it. I crouched, caught my breath, heard footsteps. 4 pairs of feet, it seemed. That meant the other 3 had stayed somewhere above to block my retreat. Smarter than I had thought. Good for them. I waited until the first reached the turn. His heel struck the mesh 1 meter from me. I let him take one more step and broke his knee with the butt of the stub revolver. He collapsed, screamed, rolled on the mesh. The second behind him hesitated, and that was enough. I shot him point blank in the chest. The recoil threw me back. My shoulder jerked with pain. I knew the feeling. The blow was not strong, but it caught an old wound from my years in the magistratum. I did not have time to attack the third. The third had more experience. He leaped forward and knocked me onto my back. His Las pistol flashed so close to my temple that sight vanished in my left eye for an instant and I saw nothing. We rolled across the mesh. He landed on me with all his weight. I smelled his breath, sour with cheap amasec. I managed to jam the revolver beneath his chin. Thunder! His head snapped back. I lay without moving for another 10 seconds, only breathing out. Then I shoved him off. The body fell beside me on the mesh, face down, and I looked for the first time at who he had been. Young, stubble still soft, not like mine, 25 at most. Around his neck hung an amulet, a pendant made from a cut-down shell casing. On his hand was a tattooed number plate, a soldier's mark from the 52nd Infantry Regiment. A former guardsman. Served the Imperium, came to the hive, joined a gang. I knew nothing about him, and now I never would. Somewhere farther on, the fourth was shouting into a vox. Shouting the way men shout when they understand they are done. I got up and followed the voice. He stood by a sealed door in a recess, back to the metal. In his hands was a heavy stubber, the machine gun cousin of my revolver, only worse. Long barrel, no cylinder, sack feed. He lifted it, saw me, and gave a burst. I dropped behind some box on the floor. The box was empty. About 8 bullets went straight through it, punched the metal like plywood and struck sparks. One spark caught something inside the box and it began to burn, some old rags. I leaned out and fired from below. The first bullet went into the wall, the second into his groin, the third into his chest. He slid down the sealed door, leaving a long dark brown stripe on it. I crawled to him on my elbows. My shoulder was burning. I checked it through the coat with my fingers. It was not a field wound, a shard of ferrocrete. One of the ricochets had entered the muscle and lodged near the bone. I dug it out with my fingers and nearly lost consciousness from the pain. Then I pressed a strip of my own bandage under the coat. Crude, but it would help for a while. It stank of burned cloth, mine included, and of burned hair on my left temple, where the trace of the La's flash had not yet cooled. Behind the sealed door there was silence. I pressed my ear to it. Behind the thick metal someone was quietly sobbing, a man's voice without words, just a sob. And another sound, heavy bubbling breathing, the kind made by lungs full of liquid. I stood, leaned my good shoulder against the door, wiped my palm on the coat, revolver in the left hand, door lever in the right. I looked at my own hand, and in that instant understood with perfect clarity that behind this door I would not be a hero. I would be an executioner, and that in this galaxy, the difference between the first and the second is exactly as large as I allow myself to pretend. I turned the lever. The door yielded. Inside, the ceiling was low. It hung down, dripping foul liquid. An emergency lamp flickered green. Slow pulses, each one fading long after the flash. In that green light the room appeared, then sank back into darkness. It appeared, and I saw damp on the walls, an old pump in the center, crusted with lime growths like a rock, and a mattress by the far wall. It vanished, and I heard only the sob again. Owen sat on the floor beside the mattress. He was exactly as I had imagined him. Thin, 25 years old, in a dirty dockworker's overall. Grime mixed with oil on his face. Hair stuck to his forehead. His eyes were the eyes of a man who had not slept for 4 days in a row, and on every one of those nights had decided when he would cross the line. Empty, desperate. On the mattress lay a man of about 30, maybe a little older. The same build as me, but dried out as if all water had been drawn from him drop by drop. His skin was patchy. Earthy patches passed into yellow, yellow into almost black. Abscesses ripened under his left eye. He was breathing, but each inhale was longer than the exhale and longer than it should have been. In the middle of that breath, something rattled in his chest. This was the late form of what imperial parishes call hereditary taint and medics call genetic rot. A rare sickness, inherited unevenly. First-order heirs have a chance of 1 in 6. From the 6th stage, inoperable. Imperial clinics do not spend resources on it. They write the patient off at once. Beside the mattress stood the open box. My box, the one they had sent me for. Inside, in cradles of some soft, almost living tissue, lay 6 ampules. Smooth, pearly, shining with that inner light I remembered from the smuggler's warehouse many years before. They smelled as Merrick had described, like after a storm, like old blood. Owen saw me and did not lift a weapon. He had no weapon at all. No revolver, no kitchen knife. He simply looked at me and blinked, as if he had been waiting for a long time. "You are the last," he said. "Yes, of all those they sent, I work alone." "I know, I saw you coming." I did not ask where he had seen me. Doc or Tex know every passage and crack in their section by birthright. He could have been in any of a dozen service ways. "Your brother?" I asked, nodding at the mattress. "Eli." Owen's voice shook. "His name is Eli." He said it the way one speaks the name of a long-dead man he does not want to forget, as if he had already begun saying goodbye. "How old?" 32. "Older than you." "Younger by 6 years." Everything settled into place. He was quiet for a while. 13 years ago, Owen began, not looking at me. Down in our mine, a gas pocket ruptured on the 6th lower horizon. I was an assistant driller. Eli worked on the same horizon, cutting. When it blew, it tore through the support rebar and collapsed the first layer. I was under a block. It pinned my legs, did not crush them, but pinned me, and I could not get out. If I had stayed there 20 more minutes, I would have suffocated because the ventilation had gone too. He paused. I listened in silence. Eli came for me. He had been on the neighboring horizon, not ours. He heard I was not answering over Vox. He went down alone, without rescuers, without masks, into bad air, found me, cleared the block. I do not know how. I still do not know. There were 200 kilograms of weight there, and he carried me on himself to the emergency lift, and he breathed that air for an hour. After that, they wrote him off from the mines. His lungs were badly damaged. They were literally burned out. Then this began, this genetic rot, the doctors say. They say he always had it. The air simply woke it. They say the list for patients of his type has long been closed. He looked at me. 13 years, he said. 13 years I have cared for him. I worked double shifts to pay for bandages, black stim, whatever could be stolen from medics illegally. We live in one room on the 3rd. Every evening I come home, change his bandages, feed him, look after him, give him watered alcohol at night because otherwise he cannot sleep from the pain. Sometimes he recognizes me, sometimes not really. He turned his eyes to the ampules. "I saw the module fall," he continued softly. "I was simply nearby. I went over. The crew had no chance. They were all dead. I checked. The box lay on the co-pilot's seat. It was glowing. I did not know what it was. I opened it, looked at the ampules, read the marking. The marking was not ours. I could not even say which race it belonged to. I closed the box and I took it." "Why?" "Because in that same minute a thought came into my head." He lifted his eyes. "That if I were someone else, someone who had any chance at a solution, I would try. It is a chance, at least some chance. I do not know if it works. I went looking for someone who would agree to inject the drug. I found no one." He looked at me. "I was going to do it myself anyway," he said. "I have the needle. The ampule opens without a syringe. It has its own mechanism. I am not a medic. I could miss. Or it may not be what we think, but I am ready for that." "Ready for what exactly?" "For either death." That I understood. I understood it as clearly as no one else in the hive could have in that moment. "You can shoot me now and it will all end quickly. But I ask one thing." "What?" "Give me 5 minutes." He raised his hand. It was shaking. "Give me 5 minutes," he repeated. "I will open the ampule. I will give it to him. Then do whatever you want. I will not resist. I will not run. I will even give you the box. Whatever is left of it, take it and go. 5 minutes, Maddox. I have waited 13 years for this." On the mattress, Eli wheezed. He said not a word, only gave a strong, dull wheeze. He had no strength left. I stood. I listened to my breathing. I listened to the green flash of the emergency lamp, that moment when it seems it will go out entirely, yet every time it returns. I listened to the low sound of the tether somewhere above us. I thought. I thought about Lucien Grieve, with his smooth skin and the cylinder on the table. I thought about all the small details that added up to the same answer. How he sat opposite me without preamble, like a man unused to bargaining and aware that his counterpart understands it. How he named a syndicate, but said the words control sigil merchants do not use that word. That word is used by people from whom customs officers avert their eyes at a distance. How he rapped the threat quietly, without raising his voice, in one short breath, as if reading a sentence already signed by someone else. Most of all, how he chose me. He knew I had served in the magistratum. He knew I had been thrown out. He knew I had nowhere to go and that I understood what the credentials of his superiors looked like. Merchants do not come looking for men like me. I was working for the Ordo Xenos. I no longer doubted it. I thought about how the Inquisition itself is not one thing. I had learned that well enough in service. In the magistratum, we had to deal with inquisitorial people a few times, and they were always different people. Some look at a Xenos artifact with the interest of a scholar and take it for study, while witnesses are merely warned harshly. Others come, and after them black shuttles pass through the sector for 2 nights. This matter did not belong to the Inquisition in general. It belonged to a master, and judging by Lucien, I was working for a Puritan. One of those who do not deal with Xenos things. Such people seize a sample, clean up their trace, and when needed burn everything they consider contaminated. That is not the law of the whole Inquisition. That is the handwriting of the particular inquisitor to whom Lucien answers. I thought that if the drug truly was Eldari and truly worked, and I did not know whether it would, and no one would ever know because trials like that are not done, still, in a hive where Lucien's master had already cast his net, there was no place for a miracle. If Owen injected the drug into his brother, and his brother lived, the simple fact that someone in this hive had been healed by Xenos tech could not be allowed to reach the wrong eyes. A master like that would not believe he was the only one healed, or rather, the only one infected. A master like that would come and burn the whole level. Millions of people. Things like that had happened in Colchis before. I had read the reports when I served. In my own working files, back when I still wore the uniform, there were 2 cases where the signature at the bottom was exactly the type that I am now almost sure belonged to Lucien's master. One case, the quarter of Ulislin, 3,000 people. The second, the Ujedna cargo station, nearly 1,000. Both written off as sanitary cleansing of a Xenos contaminated zone. Both signed in the same week by the same hand. I thought that if I said fine to Owen now and gave him 5 minutes, I would become either an accomplice in Xenos heresy or an accomplice in the death of a quarter. Whatever happened after, whether it worked or not, Lucien's master would sooner or later learn that the box had been taken from the shuttle and that the box had been opened and used. Lucien would clean me first. Then they would find Owen wherever he hid. Then they would find Eli living or dead. Then the quarter. Then the lift. Then the hive. Maybe half the planet. I thought about Eli, breathing on the mattress with that breath. I thought about the possible consequences once more, very carefully. Owen, I said. He raised his head. In his eyes moved a small shadow of hope, small as the flame in a cheap low stick when it catches in the wind. I slowly raised the revolver. I am very sorry, I said. It was the most honest thing I had said in a year. I fired. He fell to the floor beside the mattress, not sharply, but slowly, sideways, as if he had finally been allowed to lie down and rest. The revolver answered deafeningly inside the concrete box. The casing rang onto the wet floor. Eli jerked on the mattress. His hand moved. I do not know if it was reflex or something conscious. It reached toward the brother who had died for him. It did not reach. I walked over and stood above the mattress. I will not describe the second shot. I do not want to. I will only say that after I made it, I stayed frozen in the same pose for another 30 seconds. Not because I was waiting for something, but because if I had begun to move, I would have fallen. My legs stopped obeying me for a while. My right leg shook uncontrollably. I stood on the left, leaning on the pump, until the right returned to order. The ampules in the box kept shining with their pearly light, not knowing what had happened. Inside the box, in the cradle beside one ampule, lay a little card. I noticed it only then. On the card, in a script almost unlike ours, was something resembling text. Perhaps an instruction, perhaps a prayer, perhaps simply a serial number. I did not touch it. I closed the box and took it. At the exit from the pump station, I stopped, looked back, and thought about what might have happened had I done otherwise. I took a deep breath and closed the door behind me. The water keeps running into this old, dirty, cracked sink. The water is filthy, rusty. I look at the box. The pulsing under my palm is the same. Nothing has changed. Not one ampule is broken. Owen opened the box not through the control seam. He worked with the Xenos lock on the end, with the side the Eldari made for their own hands. When I took the box from the pump station, I carefully put the lid back into place myself and sat with it a long time before I managed to align it so the thin sigil along the seam joined back into its proper line. Owen had not touched the sigil. There are no marks of tampering on it. I hope Lucian will not learn the box was opened if he checks the breach by the seam and not by the end. And judging by the way he spoke the word sigil in the bar, that is exactly what he checks. Then it will all pass. If he wants to look deeper, let him go to those who make these boxes. My version will be simple. I took it from the site. I came here. I hand it over. I slowly adjust the collar of my coat. My left shoulder hurts. I got the shard out, but the muscle is swelling, pulsing. On the weekend, I will find a proper medic who will not ask questions. In the Imperium, there is always a proper medic if you have something to pay with. Today, I will have something to pay with. I take the box in both hands and leave the washroom. The bar beyond the door is the same as it was 6 cycles ago. The same 3 bulbs above the counter, one of them flickering at a rhythm close to the pause in my own heartbeat. The same barman with the same towel he shifts from shoulder to shoulder every 15 minutes out of habit. The same old music box, and from it still comes the same imperial string hymn that sits last in the playlist because no one chooses it, and when the machine runs out of selections, it is the only thing left. Lucian sits at the corner table. He looks exactly as he did 6 cycles ago, not one crease. In his hand is a cup of hot salted water sold here under the name of broth. He is not drinking. The cup is there so he does not stand out. I walk over and set the box on the table. I do not sit. He does not look at the box. He looks at me. Very quickly, briefly, the way a mago scans a working part. His eyes move over my coat, my face, my knuckles. His pupils narrow slightly again. I know what he is thinking. Did I open the box? He sees too much blood on me. He sees the exhaustion in my eyes. He guesses what I meant. And he sees that I am silent. All done, he says at last. All done, I say. He places a chip on the table, a second cylinder, smaller. I take it. Witnesses? None, I say. Everything that could walk and talk will trouble no one now. The traces have been led away. Written off as a local gang settling accounts with offense. The Arbites will receive a report in 2 days. No one will mention you. He nods. You work well. I work badly, I say. You are simply lucky that others work worse. That is the only insolence I allow myself. One corner of his mouth lifts slightly. He takes the box and leaves. That simply. No nod to me, no wish for luck, no glance back. For him, I already do not exist, as if I never did and our meeting never happened. I sit in his chair, still warm. Amasic, I tell the barman, cheap, double. The barman brings the glass. I look at it for a long time. I lay the chip beside the glass. The sum on it is the same as the advance, plus more on top. I run a finger along its edge. It is warm. It has the warmth of my hand. And my hand took warmth from the box, and the box took it from the ampules, and the ampules took it from whoever made them. And who was that? Guess for yourself. That is the chain. From the Eldari to me, through Owen, through Eli, through Merrick, through Rusty Tooth, through 4 gang men in the tunnel. All of them took part so that today I could have a chip beside a glass. Owen believed in a miracle. He believed that Eldari ampule could stop Imperial rot. Perhaps he was right. I will never know. But I know something else. Even if he was right, even if Eli had lived, by the evening of the second day, black shuttles would have come to the level, with Arbites and quarantine teams behind them. Within a week, our level would have been ash, and in reports, they would have written sanitary cleansing of a Xenos contaminated zone. And Eli would be dead, and Owen would be dead, and everyone who lived near them, everyone who greeted them on the stairs, everyone who sold them bread, all would be dead. With my shot, perhaps, I saved thousands of people. I want to believe that. I could go now and sleep with that thought if it warmed me, but it does not warm me. When I look into the bottom of the glass, I do not see a savior there. I see a man who, in a pump station, chose 2 people he did not pity strongly enough, and for those 2, the right caliber was in his hand. That I managed, to choose those who were not pitied enough. And here is what else I understood as I rode the lift back down here, to this sink, to this table, to this glass. In this galaxy there are bullets for every occasion. There is my caliber, there is bolter caliber, there is plasma, there is laws. There are rounds with which the Arbites crush riots. There are rounds with which the Astartes stop tyrannids. There are shells that burn heretics and shells that plant flags on new worlds. For any death, for any occasion, someone has the correct caliber ready at hand. For mercy, there is none. No ammunition for mercy was ever cast in this universe. No Mechanicus forged it in their foundries. No quartermaster shipped it in crates. No priest of the Adeptus Ministorum blessed it on an altar. It is not in the depots. It is not issued under signature. It is not listed on manifests. I drink the amasic in one swallow. It smells of acetone and burned sugar. I set the glass upside down and put the chip in my pocket. Outside the bar window, somewhere far away, the lift begins to hum. It starts another ascent. Another capsule goes up to the orbital docks, where another void barge will meet it and carry its contents to another bureaucratic shadow. The hum moves first through the floor, then through the air, then through my rib cage. I stand, turn the collar of my coat higher, and go. The light in the bar changes from red to blue, then back. Beyond the door, damp and the steam of cheap extractors cling at once to my face. The hive lives. The lift works. The Imperium rests on men like me, and men like Owen, and men like Eli. All 3 of us took part in the same chain over one night on one level. Now 2 of us are dead, and the 3rd walked out with money and a box in his hands. Somewhere above us, on the upper levels in the spire, Lucian Grieve has reported a successful mission and received thanks. And I walk along the neon-lit street of the lower dock, and under my coat my revolver swings. My old friend, my salvation, my sentence, my curse. I keep walking into the unknown, and the lift still hums with the same stubborn sound. I would like simply to take off and fly, or better, to fly away into freedom through every barrier, far from every sorrow. I think that once, something like that was called a bird. Yes,